Hey, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here as I break down 3 more fantasy football sleepers heading into 2019. Now, this is our Fantasy Sleepers 2.0, which means that there is a 1.0. There is a other video with tons of sleepers. I believe me and Rob did it, and it was, I believe, 8 or 10 guys that we broke down. Either way, in the top right-hand corner of this video, there will be a link for you to click and to go check that out. But obviously, we're going to want to let you know to finish this video first. Now, I'm only going to be doing 3 sleepers for a few reasons. One, we've been doing a ton of work, and the next video we're going to release is going to be our quarterback rankings, our official quarterback rankings heading into the 2019 season. That's very exciting, and that takes a boatload of work, and so I wanted to keep this video short for that reason. And then 2, because Rob's not here, so I want to save some sleepers for later on so me and Rob can come back together. We're going to do a 3rd sleepers video. Really excited for that, but that's pretty much the outline for this video. We're going to talk about 3 guys that you absolutely need to be watching heading into this season because, as always, as obvious as it sounds, they're good sleepers. Before we get into it, I wanted to clarify. Somebody has said that, hey, I really appreciate when you guys define some of the words that you're talking about, and so I want to do that for this video. The definition of a sleeper, I wrote this up myself while doing the research. A sleeper is a player whose fantasy value outweighs his believed value by most fantasy owners, who outscores players valued over him and drafted ahead of him, and who proves to be more valuable and score more fantasy points than their average draft position suggests. That is a somewhat vague definition, but it perfectly fits what a sleeper is, and it gives us a lot of room to work with. So without any further ado, let's dive into it and talk about our first sleeper for this video. All right, so the first guy we absolutely have to talk about is Dante Pettis. There's 2 reasons we got to talk about him. One, doesn't feel like we've talked about him enough this offseason, but man, this guy he really is a good sleeper. Those are really the 2 reasons right there. This is a very valuable player who fits this definition quite well, and we haven't mentioned him much, so this was a guy we had to talk about because we love him going into this season. Currently, right now, according to ADP, he is the 35th wide receiver off the board. That is 87th overall. That puts him as a wide receiver 3 in that wide receiver range sort of thing, despite him being easily a wide receiver 2 talent and honestly is a wide receiver 1 prospect. If everything goes well, he could definitely be a fantasy wide receiver 1 this season. That might be a bit of a stretch. Everything does have to work out right, but it's fantasy football. To be in the top 12, everything has to work out for you anyways, so why not? And here's really some of the reasons why. For starters, he was a rookie last season, so he's going to make huge progression into his rookie season. When we compare wide receivers to other positions in the NFL, there's just a much longer learning curve, right? You can come in at running back and you can be dominant immediately. We saw that with Ezekiel Elliott. We saw that with Todd Gurley. We saw that with Saquon Barkley. Year 1, you can dominate. Wide receiver, you can't do that so much. There have been a few cases of guys like a Julio Jones or an AJ Green, but those guys are insane. Those guys are kind of anomalies, and those guys had good situations as well. And we'll get back to that later. But he finished the season strong, and that's what matters. He was still a good rookie. He even had a good rookie season despite that. Now, what I want to do is take a look at his last 4 games of the season. First thing I want to clarify is that we're not including Week 16 versus the Bears. He was hurt in the 2nd quarter. So we're counting the 4 weeks before that because you can't count that game. He really didn't play. But his last 4 games of the season, he averaged 4.25 catches a game, 4 touchdowns. He had 4 touchdowns. He didn't average 4 touchdowns. He had 338 yards. Over 16-game span, that's over 1,350 yards, 68 receptions, and 16 touchdowns. That's an absolutely dominant and phenomenal fantasy season. I mean, insane numbers right there. Not only when you look at some of these numbers, they came with a backup quarterback. We'll look at some more numbers. He had 40 targets as a rookie. He took 5 of those in for touchdowns. That means 1 in every 8 targets went for a touchdown. He won't be able to keep that number up. That's insane. And in fact, 33 of those, like I said, 33 of those targets came with backup quarterbacks and 27 receptions. So that's how many he had. 19 of those went for first downs. That is a high first down rate, a high touchdown rate. The fact of the matter, he has been very efficient. He is really just getting it done when he's out there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is going to be, especially for him and for a lot of rookie wide receivers, there's a huge curve between their rookie season and their second year. This is because they're used to simpler and worse coverage, worse players in coverage, worse quarterbacks, easier playbook, slower play, less demand on perfection now, route running and on form and on aggressiveness going getting the ball. The fact of the matter is so many things that work into a wide receiver in college having such an easy time. When they come into the NFL, it is just shocking. Like it is, they must be so uncomfortable and so afraid of trying to figure out these coverages and everything that they need to do. So he's absolutely going to have time to progress into the second year now as he's finally getting comfortable with it and seeing how it is. Of course, that's why I mentioned his last 4 games. Those last 4 games represent him a lot better than his first 4 games. Really, the thing I have to mention now that I guess really one of the last few things is really the health. The injury last year didn't do him any favors. It really didn't. However, when he returned, he was the San Francisco 49ers. He was the #1 guy. He was the clear #1 threat wide receiver. Of course, that's not including tight end George Kittle, who was a monster, but he's really the only guy in the roster that is a legitimate threat on the outside, that can go one-on-one, who can go up and make plays, who can force double coverage in the right situations. He is an absolutely great wide receiver. And then what I want to talk about too was there was just some bad quarterback play, and that needs to be addressed. We got to talk about how bad that quarterback play was. Some of what he did well didn't really show up on the stat books, right? In fact, this is something that Rob wrote here. I'm going to quote this from him because he mentioned this, but Pettis is a great example of a guy who's just underused, right? Against the Denver Broncos and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers especially, Pettis had routes where he made the corner just look silly. On a 12-yard curl, he made a corner literally fall, and that was against Tampa Bay. On a simple 10-yard route where he just turned around, Bradley Robbie, who is, I believe now a Houston Texan, he just made him fall flat on his face. And you know what? It didn't turn into a catch because his quarterback couldn't see it, because he had bad quarterback play, because 33 of his 40 targets came with backup quarterbacks. I mean, that's absolutely insane to me, but he's a guy who has huge potential and is going to far outplay that potential heading into this season. Guys, what I want to know from you is, what do you think of Dante Pettis? Wow. And really how you think he's going to play this season. I think it's going to be huge that he's got a #1 quarterback for the whole year, huge that he's got more time to develop. In the end, the only concern is the injuries. But if the 49ers are going to make huge improvements and vast improvements on who they were last season, it really revolves around this guy being healthy. And so I'm excited to see what that's going to do. But let's move on to our #2 fantasy sleeper. All right, so I think the next guy we got to talk about has to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I love this guy. There's a lot of reasons to like him. Now, he's being drafted as the 54th wide receiver and the 143rd player overall. So that puts him in the wide receiver 4 to 5 range, giving him a lot of room to far and exceed that and be easily a sleeper. Really, he is a prospect and has the potential to be a wide receiver 2 or 3. He definitely fits in that category. He has the situation. He's got the talent. We'll talk about the talent in a second, but the situation's great. He's playing on a Green Bay Packers team that I like with, I guess fantasy-wise I like, with Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback that only has one good option in the passing game in Davante Adams, and that is an elite option, by the way. And so really get that great situation where he can become the #2 guy, and I think he will be, I really do, where he can become the #2 guy, and the attention will be drawn towards Adams, and he's going to get a lot of open looks, and I think he's going to get a lot of deep throws, and this guy could be a huge playmaker. The stats bode well for him. Remember, last season he was a rookie, right? And we compare rookies. We're not expecting over 1,000 yards. We're not expecting 10 touchdowns. We want to see a guy who's developing well, and we want to see a guy who's in a good system. That's what we're looking for when we're seeing guys from rookie to their second year as far as their fantasy value goes. And he had good stats, 581 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns on 38 receptions. But he had some more impressive stats. His 15.3 yards per reception ranked 16th in the NFL among qualifying wideouts, and he generated a pass rating of 95.4 with 5.4 average yards after the catch. Finally, this is the most impressive stat we don't get to talk about much. He finished 3rd in the NFL for separation rate at 70%. That's a huge number. It's just it's his ability. 70% of the time he was successful in keeping distance away from the cornerback or whoever is in coverage. That's really what matters. That is going to be huge. The NFL is not like college football or college basketball. A big tall guy just can't go up there and jump and make it and win every toss-up ball. You have to get separation. You absolutely do. There's a reason we see guys like Odell Beckham Jr. and Antonio Brown and Julio Jones as some of the top wide receivers in the NFL because they get separation. That's huge. You can have the jump and the speed and you can have the hands, but that's what really matters, and the stats are absolutely there. But for me, that wasn't enough, right? To really like him as much as I do, we needed to see something more, and that's absolutely something, some sort of news, some sort of report, something out of camp. Doesn't matter what it is, but we just need some positivity, right? Someone saying, hey, he's improving, some scouts, right? Something like that. Doesn't even matter what it is. We found quite a bit. So I want to read to you quotes from Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. Now, the Davante Adams quote is a little bit a little bit long, but I think it explains very well how a lot of people feel about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And here's what he said. He said, I think this offense is really catered for a guy like him. He continued saying, I think he's seeing that and he's recognizing it. We've had conversations about it, and I think he's really starting to understand how this thing works. He's come in and he's made some plays, and I think that with the young guys, it's hard to know exactly how to deal with that early success, but he's doing a great job of it right now. I saw the way he hit the off-season from videos just about our communication, and he's taking it very seriously now. A few things I love. Talked about he's out there making plays. I like how he said that this is the sort of style offense that's catered for a player like him, that he's taking this that he's taking this season very seriously this offseason as he heads into the year. And he just talked about how great he is. Of course, Marquez is a very young wide receiver with huge potential. The stats showed some of those numbers being broken down were really showing his potential. Of course, he had some things to work on, but that's what the offseason is for. That's what year 1 to year 2 is for. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is one of the best fantasy sleeping wide receivers heading into this season. I love this guy. But I'd love some pushback. Guys, let me know in the comments down below why you don't think it'll work out. I think it's a perfect system. I think it's a perfect offense, and I really, really, really like him heading into this season. I've said it about 5 or 6 times, but there's not much negative to say. He's a really simple case. The stats prove it. The quotes prove it. Everything seems to prove it. The situation proves it. And really the final thing I wanted to read with this quote from Aaron Rodgers. I absolutely like it. When asked if they have found the number 2 guy in that offense, said, there's nothing wrong with having a go-to guy like Davante Adams who's dynamic. However, said, I think it's obvious we need to find a complementary piece in place. I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling has had a fantastic spring and really stepped up as the guy who can be an every down player. When the quarterback is saying that, that is huge. I absolutely trust Rodgers when he says that, and this is going to be a good fantasy season. But let's move on to the final guy that we're going to be talking about for this video, guys. All right, so the final guy that I want to talk about is the Baltimore tight end, Mark Andrews. He was also a rookie last year. Apparently, we're really going with a lot of sophomores in this video. But why am I talking about him? For starters, he's a sleeper, he's undervalued, he's talented. There's a lot of reasons, but actually because of a question that somebody asked or a comment that somebody made on this YouTube video, or not on this one, on a YouTube video on our channel, that really sparked me to do some research and to find this guy. And we had made our video, our mock draft video, and in that video we got Travis Kelce as our tight end, and I even said, hey, if you can, get a top-level tight end. It's part of my philosophy where I really think that you should get a good tight end because there are so few. You can always find a running back and a wide receiver and a quarterback, and you can find other positions. But there are like, last year there was like 3, maybe 4 good tight ends, and that's it. There's no backups. There's not enough tight ends for everyone. Not even half of the league will get a good tight end, and so it's really important to make sure that you're getting the right guy. But he said, what if you can't? Maybe you're in a keeper league, all the other guys are kept, or maybe you don't have the right draft picks, or maybe it just doesn't work out. All right, the question was, who the heck can we turn to? Is there a guy that has any value? And I think Mark Andrews is one of those guys. Now, according to ADP, he's being drafted as the 26th tight end off the board and the 232nd overall player. I'm here to let you know 26 tight ends don't get drafted in the league. 232 players don't get drafted in a typical fantasy draft. That means this guy is going undrafted in almost all of your leagues. That is huge. I absolutely think that is huge. So right off the bat, I think that makes a big difference that there's a long way for him to go. He's a guy who could easily finish top 12 or even top 10 as a fantasy tight end. He had some very, very good stats last year. We're going to break those down in a minute, but first I think we need to address the situation that he is in. One, I'll address Baltimore is not a great situation, guys. It just isn't. It's not this amazing situation with an awesome offensive line, a great quarterback, and an offensive-minded coach. It's a defensive-minded coach, a team that loves their defense, and a young quarterback that likes to run the ball a lot. However, there's a few things that you have to know. Joe Flacco's played the first half of the season was awful, and that's who was throwing Mark Andrews the ball. And then it switched to Lamar Jackson, and Mark Andrews' stats actually improved a little bit. We'll talk about his stats again more later. But Lamar Jackson, he worked better with Lamar Jackson. And in fact, the last game of the season that they played together, Lamar Jackson's #1 target was Mark Andrews. Finishing the season out, he was really the top receiver in that offense when you include all the tight ends and running backs and wide receivers, and I think that bodes very, very well for him. Now, again, quarterback situation still isn't great, but we saw last year in San Francisco a mediocre quarterback situation with a very talented tight end will produce a very talented fantasy tight end. Look at it. We just talked about it earlier with Dante Pettis. They were on backup quarterbacks all year pretty much, and George Kittle was able to go out and set the record for most receiving yards by a tight end in a season. That's absolutely insane. He was able to do that just off of good enough quarterback play. Not great, not even good, just good enough. And so while I don't love Lamar Jackson, I don't think Lamar Jackson is great, he just needs to be good enough. Not even good, just good enough. And yes, quarterback situation is still a concern. Every player has a concern. There's a reason these guys are sleepers instead of just highly valued as a whole. But that right there bodes really well. And he seriously proved himself. Last year he had 50 targets, 34 catches, 550 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, when you compare that to most other tight ends in the NFL, that's above average. That's pretty good stats. But it gets even better when you really break down his numbers stat by stat. For example, he had the 5th most receiving yards by a rookie tight end in the last decade. Now, that isn't just a decade. However, this has been the highest, the most productive fantasy decade for tight ends ever. I mean, the fact of the matter is tight ends are receiving more. They're getting more targets, more yards, more touchdowns, more catches, everything. Tight ends are more used in the passing game than they have ever been before, and he finished with the 5th most receiving yards by a rookie tight end in the last decade. That compares to guys like Rob Gronkowski, guys like Jimmy Graham, a guy like Evan Ingram who had a huge rookie season. This is a huge list to be in. To be 5th there is a very phenomenal place to be. He also finished 2nd among qualifying tight ends in yards per catch with 16.2 yards per catch. This is one of those tight ends. He can go down the field and actually stretch the field quite a bit. Of course, we know tight ends are good down the middle. They're good short. They're big bodies. They almost box guys out like it's basketball. But for a tight end to also be able to stretch the field, that makes a difference. That makes a huge difference, especially in an offense with a running quarterback who can buy you time and hopefully wait till you're open deep and make the throw. That's going to make his stats a lot easier to get and going to help him make some huge plays this season. He finished 5th among tight ends in yards per route. Yards per route is huge. That takes into account how often he's being targeted and what he's doing when he is targeted. He finished with 2.01 yards per route. Again, that was 5th among tight ends. Finally, he finished 1st among qualifying tight ends with passer rating generated at 129.9. He makes his quarterbacks better. His rookie quarterback, Lamar Jackson, who's going into his sophomore season, his 2nd year, and is going to improve as a passer, he was already 1st in the NFL. He was already making him better. He was best on the offense. He was best among all tight ends. 129.9 is an insane passer rating to generate when targeted. Absolutely fantastic. The situation as a whole, not great, but good enough. The statistics are huge. We've heard some good things this offseason as well about this guy. Not some fantastic or amazing things about how awesome he is and he's going to be the next greatest tight end of all time. No. But we've heard things like he is really developing well. I've heard things like he seems to be Lamar Jackson's #1 target. I think there's a lot to like in this situation. Again, he's not going to be a top 4 fantasy tight end this year, but top 12, top 10, easily in my mind. And for a guy that you can wait till the very end of your draft to take, that's huge. That is an awesome value pick. All right, so guys, that's all we have for this video today, or that's all I have for this video today. We were just breaking down 3 players, and it was a pretty simple sleeper video. Of course, I'd encourage you to drop a comment down below and tell us what you think of all of these players. Suggest more video ideas for us to do, and get ready because we're soon going to be releasing our official 2019 quarterback rankings. Guys, I could not be more excited. As always, I hope you have a good day, and God bless.